I am 68 years old, and recently I found something that, without exaggeration, changed my life. It wasn't an expensive medicine. It wasn't a revolutionary therapy. It was something so simple, so common, that I find it hard to believe no one had mentioned it to me before. You see, I wasn't always like this. There was a time when I remembered everything: names, dates, phone numbers. But one day, without warning, words started slipping away. Proper names felt like they were on the tip of my tongue. I would enter a room and forget what I came to do. I found myself repeating stories I had already told, and sometimes I didn't even realize it. At first, I laughed it off. I attributed it to age, stress, fatigue. But over time, I began to worry. That feeling of fog in my head, of mental exhaustion, followed me everywhere. I felt slower, as if someone had turned down the volume of my thoughts. The worst part wasn't forgetting things. The worst part was feeling like I was losing a part of myself. And then, without looking for it too much, I heard about something I had always associated with gyms, with young people wanting to gain muscle: creatine. I never imagined that word would have anything to do with me, much less with my mind. But I decided to research, read, try. And what happened next was, honestly, unexpected. Today, I want to tell you how creatine transformed my mental health after the age of 65. How it helped me think more clearly, concentrate, and feel like myself again. I am not a doctor or a scientist, but I am an older person who was on the verge of giving up, and who found something worth sharing. Before continuing, I would like to get to know you a little better. How old are you, and where are you listening from? Tell me in the comments, because although every story is different, many times we share more than we think. How it all started. The first symptom was forgetting names. It all began so subtly that at the time, I didn't pay much attention. One afternoon, talking to my daughter on the phone, I mentioned that childhood friend I used to play with at the neighborhood park. I wanted to say his name, but it wouldn't come out. It was on the tip of my tongue, but I couldn't remember. I fell silent. In the end, I gave up and said, "You know who I mean, that tall guy who always wore a hat." Then came the keys. I would leave them in the drawer and then look for them for 20 minutes. Sometimes I had them in my hand and didn't realize it. I started forgetting why I entered a room. I'd go to the kitchen, open the refrigerator, and wonder what I was looking for. I would stop suddenly, confused. And then came the repetitions. Without noticing, I started telling the same stories. I told my grandson how I met his grandmother, and he, with a smile that was no longer so patient, said, "Grandpa, you told me that last week." That hurt. Not because of him, but because of me. Because I really didn't remember. Once, at a family dinner, I called my son-in-law by my late brother's name. Everyone acted like nothing happened, but they noticed. I noticed too. That awkward silence hung in the air for the rest of the night. They didn't say it directly, but I could see the worry in their eyes. That mix of compassion and fear that one tries to hide when they start to notice that someone they love is no longer the same. And while all this was happening outwardly, something worse was happening inside me. A kind of silent sadness, as if I was losing something I couldn't get back. It wasn't just memories. It was identity. It was the confidence I had in my own mind. I felt like something inside me was slowly turning off, and no one, not even me, knew how to turn it back on. What nobody tells you about memory after 65. Over time, you start accepting certain things. The body slows down, joints ache, vision is not the same. It's part of the deal of living a long time. But what few tell you, or no one dares to explain well, is what happens to your mind. After 65, the brain ages too. That's natural. Neurons don't communicate as fast as before. The speed with which you process, remember, and associate information slows down, though it doesn't disappear completely. It's like the same file you've always opened now takes a few seconds longer to load. That in itself shouldn't scare us. It's called normal cognitive aging. It's not a disease. But the problem is when that line is crossed without you realizing it. When what seemed like a simple distraction becomes constant. When you can't follow a conversation without getting lost. When you read a page and don't remember anything you just read. Then it's no longer just a matter of age. It's something deeper. And here is where that other kind of loss begins to be felt. One that goes beyond forgetfulness. It's not just about not remembering a date or a name. It's something more subtle, and at the same time more unsettling. It's that feeling of not having the same control over your mind. Knowing what you want to say, but not finding the words. Feeling your thoughts become blurry, as if you were trying to read a book underwater. And when that happens, it's no longer just about memory. It's about identity. Because much of who we are is built on what we remember. Our stories, our decisions, our people. If memory weakens, everything else starts to wobble too. No one prepares you for that. No one tells you clearly. And when you start living it, it's very easy to think there's nothing you can do, that you have to resign yourself. But the truth is, there are things we can do, and sometimes they come from where you least expect. My search for answers, between doctors, books, and frustration. When the forgetfulness became more frequent, I decided I couldn't ignore it any longer. I went to my general practitioner. He asked me some questions and sent me to a neurologist. The appointments were long, the hallways cold, the waiting rooms full of faces like mine, with tired looks that didn't know if they were there for prevention or fear. They gave me tests, drawing clocks, repeating words, memorizing sequences. Nothing serious, they said. All within what's expected for your age. I nodded, grateful for not having an alarming diagnosis. But inside, I knew something wasn't right. The recommendations were the usual ones. Sleep well, do crossword puzzles, drink more water, read books, walk, socialize. I was already doing all that. And if I wasn't, it was because I didn't feel like it, or because the fog in my head stopped me. They talked about supplements, pills with difficult names, capsules with vague promises. I bought several, took them diligently. Nothing changed. I also looked in books. I spent afternoons reading articles about the mind, aging, Alzheimer's, nutrients, vitamins. Every time I found something new, I felt a spark of hope. But most times, that spark quickly went out. There were days when I felt defeated. I thought maybe this was just how it had to be, that the mind, like the body, simply wears out. And there wasn't much more to do but accept it. Until one day, while listening to a radio program, a doctor talked about something that surprised me. It wasn't a medicine. It wasn't an invasive therapy. It was a substance that the body already produces but decreases with age. Creatine. I didn't pay attention right away. I had always thought that was for young, muscular people, for those who go to the gym and want to look bigger. Not for someone like me who just wanted mental clarity and a little peace. But that night, instead of changing the station, I stayed listening. And that's when I began to understand that maybe there was something more I could do. What is creatine, and why does no one connect it to the mind? For many years, creatine was a word I associated with another generation. With young people lifting weights in gyms, with protein shakes and muscles growing fast. I never imagined that same word would have anything to do with my memory, nor with the well-being of an older person. But the more I read, the more surprised I was. It turns out creatine is not a modern invention. It's a natural substance already living in our bodies. We produce it in the liver, pancreas, and kidneys, and we use it without knowing it every day. Its function is simple to understand. It gives us energy. It's an immediate source of fuel for cells, and not just for muscles as many think, but also for the brain. Because yes, the brain also needs energy, a lot of it. Even though it only represents a small part of our body, it consumes a large amount of what we eat and produce. When energy is scarce, the mind slows down, gets tired, becomes foggy. And here is where creatine comes into play. In recent decades, several scientific studies began exploring creatine's impact on mental functions like memory, concentration, and cognitive clarity. One of them, done in older adults, found that those taking creatine showed improvements in short-term memory tasks and reasoning. Another study mentioned a possible relationship between creatine and reduction of mild cognitive impairment, that intermediate state between common forgetfulness and a more serious disease. But beyond the studies, what convinced me were the testimonials. People like me, who weren't looking to run marathons or lift weights, but to remember what they read, maintain a conversation without getting lost, find their keys without anxiety. Reading those stories, I felt accompanied. There was a possibility, a small door maybe not everyone knew about, and that door didn't promise miracles, but a little more clarity. And in my situation, that was already a lot. That's how I stopped seeing creatine as something foreign and started wondering, what if it really can help me? I started taking creatine without high expectations. I decided to try it with the same attitude you take a herbal tea recommended by a friend. Curious, but without expecting too much. I bought a jar of creatine monohydrate, the simplest one. No weird flavors or strange mixes. I read the label carefully, consulted my general practitioner. He said he didn't see a problem, as long as I took it in moderation. So I started. 1 teaspoon a day, mixed with water. No big changes, no rituals, just that. The first days I felt nothing. I got up just as slow, had trouble getting started in the mornings, and the fog in my head was still there. But I didn't stop. I thought, if I've waited months for something to improve, I can wait a few more weeks. It was in the second week that something barely noticeable began to change. It wasn't that my memory suddenly became perfect. No. But by the end of the day, I felt less mentally exhausted. I could read a full article without having to go back over each paragraph. I could follow a conversation without getting distracted halfway through. And the strangest thing was, it wasn't an euphoric feeling. It was as if a kind of weight I didn't even know I was carrying had lightened a bit. It wasn't miraculous, but it was real. In the third week, I began to notice it more clearly. I not only had more physical energy, but also felt my mind was more awake. I got up wanting to do things. I wanted to go for a walk, prepare my breakfast, read the newspaper. Simple things, yes, but that before felt heavy. One day, without realizing it, I finished a call with my grandson and noticed I hadn't repeated anything. We had talked for almost half an hour, and I hadn't gotten lost even once. That's when I understood that something inside me, even if little by little, was getting better. Not like a cure that erases the problem, but like a gentle push, a discreet help that lets you move forward a little more each day. And that, for someone who had started to think nothing could change, meant much more than words can explain. What I noticed after a month, beyond memory. 1 month after starting creatine, the changes were obvious, not only to me, but to those around me. I no longer got lost in the middle of conversations. I could keep track without feeling like every sentence was a struggle. Words came faster, ideas too. It was as if the connections inside my head, which before seemed slow or interrupted, had started flowing more naturally. I regained something I hadn't felt in a long time: mental agility. It wasn't just about remembering names or places, it was deeper. It was thinking clearly, processing what I heard, responding without that long pause that used to embarrass me. And then, something else began to change. Unexpectedly, my mood. During recent years, even if I didn't say it out loud, there was a kind of shadow inside me. It wasn't sadness, nor depression, at least not as I understood it. It was discouragement, lack of motivation, a kind of silent apathy that made me postpone everything. But now, after 30 days, I found myself more active. I wanted to do simple things: organize my papers, water the plants, call a friend. I didn't have to force myself, it just came up. And that, for someone who had spent months on autopilot, was a gift. One day, without planning it, I picked up a novel I had started 3 times and never finished. I sat on the armchair, made myself a tea, and read it. Completely. Focused, without getting lost. Page after page. I enjoyed reading again like I used to decades ago. Another day I found myself writing a letter. Not a short message. A letter, like the old days. On paper. By hand. I felt something in me had reconnected. Because in the end, beyond memory, what I really regained was the feeling of being alive, of being present, of being myself again. And all that had started with something as simple as a daily teaspoon. What I learned about taking it properly after 65. When I decided to try creatine, the first thing I knew was this. I didn't want to do things blindly. I wasn't going to take something without understanding at least the basics. So I took the time to inform myself. I didn't need to know everything, but enough to do it safely. I learned that not all creatines are the same. There are many presentations, some with complex names and formulas that sound like lab jargon. But the one I use, and that many studies recommend for being the most tested, is creatine monohydrate. Nothing else, no additives, no flavors. It's the simplest and also the most reliable version. Now, about the dose, this is what works for me. A level teaspoon a day, which is roughly 5 grams. I don't take more than that, nor do I do those so-called loading phases that some young people recommend. For an older person, a steady and moderate dose is more than enough. Regarding the time of day, I tried several options. At first, I took it on an empty stomach, but it didn't agree with me. It gave me slight stomach discomfort. So I changed my routine. Now I take it after breakfast, mixed with a glass of water or some plain yogurt. Since then, I haven't had any problems. I also learned that taking it with food helps the body absorb it better. It doesn't need to be a giant meal, but something simple to accompany it. For me, a full breakfast works well. Some fruit, a toast, and that's it. Now, not everything was perfect from day one. There was a brand I tried at the beginning that came mixed with caffeine. I didn't check the label. That one didn't agree with me. It made me nervous, took away my sleep. I learned that in these cases, less is more. The purest, simplest, is usually the best. And one important thing I want to repeat clearly. Always consult your doctor first. Although creatine is considered safe, every body is different. Every person has their medical history, their medications, their conditions. Just because something helped me doesn't mean it's for everyone. But if there's something I learned on this path, it's that taking care of yourself isn't just a doctor's job. It's also listening to your body and daring to try responsibly what can give us a little clarity, energy, and dignity. Fears, myths, and what I discovered talking to other older adults. When I started telling people I was taking creatine, the first reaction I got wasn't advice, but raised eyebrows. A friend from the park, with whom I usually walk some mornings, looked at me sideways and said, "You taking that? Isn't it for bodybuilders?" Another, with a more joking tone, said, "When are you starting with the weights, champ?" I laughed with them, of course. I wasn't offended. It's normal to have preconceived ideas. I had them too. For most of us, creatine sounds like something for young people. Something taken to grow muscles, lift weights, sweat in gyms with loud music. We never imagined it as an ally for the mind of an older adult. And yet, that's exactly what I discovered. Those initial reactions didn't stop me. On the contrary, they gave me more reasons to investigate. I read more articles, watched interviews with doctors specialized in aging, reviewed real testimonials from older people who had decided to try it. And what I found gave me even more confidence. I met a 73-year-old man who had started taking creatine on a recommendation from his son, a doctor. He said that besides feeling more energetic, he noticed he could concentrate better while reading, no longer needing to reread the same page so many times. Another woman, 76 years old, wrote on a forum that she had been using it for 3 months, and although she still had some normal forgetfulness, she felt clearer and, above all, in better spirits. "I get up wanting to do things," she said, and it had been a long time since that happened. Those stories, those voices similar to mine, confirmed what I was beginning. To feel that creatine is not just for muscles, It's also for the mind, for that invisible part of us that also ages and that sometimes gets forgotten amid so much physical advice. Over time, even those friends who mocked me at first started asking with more curiosity than skepticism. One of them, who never took anything, told me recently, "If it's working for you, maybe I should try it too." And that's when I understood something. Often, what holds us back isn't the lack of options, but the fear of looking ridiculous, of doing something out of place for our age. But at this stage of life, haven't we already lived enough to decide for ourselves? How creatine helped me reconnect with my identity. Over the weeks, I realized something I didn't expect. It wasn't just memory improving, it was something deeper, something I couldn't measure with a test or explain precisely. It was as if the mental clarity I was starting to regain also gave me back a part of my identity. It wasn't only about remembering names or finding the keys. It was feeling like I was inhabiting my own mind with presence again. As if, for a long time, I had been seeing the world through a fogged glass, and now I was beginning to see clearly again. One ordinary day, for no special reason, I opened an old notebook I kept in a drawer. It was where I used to write verses, thoughts, things that came to me when I still worked. I took a pen and started writing. The words didn't come out perfect or fast, but they came out. And after finishing a small stanza, simple but sincere, I leaned back in my chair and stayed silent. I smiled, not because of the poem, but because for the first time in a long time, I recognized myself in what I had written. Another day, my granddaughter came to visit. We sat down to talk and, for some reason, ended up remembering family stories. I told her what her mother was like as a child. I talked about her great-grandfather, a house in the countryside, a summer when we all slept on mattresses on the floor. She listened with big, bright eyes, and I spoke effortlessly, without that pressure not to forget anything, without that fear of going blank. The conversation flowed like before, like when my mind was fresh. Talking again with confidence, writing again without fear, making small decisions without doubting myself. That is what creatine really gave me back. It wasn't a spectacular change, it wasn't a dramatic before and after. It was something more subtle, more honest. It was feeling that little by little, I was coming home, to that version of myself that had started to fade over the years. And when you feel that way, when you look in the mirror and recognize yourself again, then you understand that health isn't just having a functioning body. It's having a mind that remembers who you are, and a heart that still wants to live. I felt like myself again, and at my age, that is priceless. If there's one thing I've learned on this whole journey, it's that not everything is lost after 65. For a long time, I thought aging meant giving up agility, memory, curiosity, even yourself. But it doesn't have to be that way. It's not true that the mind only goes downhill. It's not true that you can't improve anymore. What happens is that many times, we simply stop looking. Creatine is not a magic potion. It's not a quick fix or a miraculous remedy. But it can be a tool, a little help, a way to tell your body and mind, I still want to be here. I still want to think clearly. I still want to feel alive. Because that's the most important thing, wanting to keep taking care of yourself. And for that, you need something beyond any supplement. You need willpower, you need decision, and you need to inform yourself. Not believe everything you hear, but also not close yourself off to new possibilities. Consult, read, ask, try cautiously. That is the path. Each of us has a different body, a different story, a unique rhythm. But there is something we all share, the right to age with dignity, to have a voice, to feel useful, to not live this stage as an end, but as a transformation. If you're listening now and have felt your thoughts slow down, your memory no longer keeping up like before, words slipping away, and days passing with more fog than light, I want to tell you something very simple but very true. It's never too late to feel strong, clear, and alive again. Thank you for accompanying me this far. You don't know how much it means to me to share this story with you. Telling it is not just an exercise of memory. It's also a way to remind myself that the path I'm walking, I do not walk alone. There are many people like you, like me, searching for answers, looking for alternatives, refusing to give up. And that's why I want to invite you to talk. Have you tried creatine? Have you experienced something similar with your memory, your concentration, your mental energy? What do you do to keep your mind awake, connected, alive? I'd love to read your comments, not just to know you're there, but because maybe your experience can help others who are starting this same path. Because that is the most valuable thing we can do at this stage of life. Support each other. Share what we've learned, what was hard, what helped us. Not from a place of superiority, but from the humility of someone who knows they are still learning. Always. And if there's one thing I want you to remember today, it's this. My memory is better than when I was 50. And that's not a miracle. It's decision. It's searching. It's not giving up. See you in the next video. And until then, take care of your mind like you care for a garden, with patience, with love, and with the certainty that it can bloom again.